I've got a riddle for you. What moves like a welterweight, punches as hard as a Ford Escort,
going as fast as it can,
and is the biggest threat to the greatest fighter of all time, Jon Jones?
Jon Jones is the best ever. Ever.
I'll give you a clue. It isn't this guy.
A lot of behind that weight, a lot of punch behind that weight, a lot of weight.
England's got a rising contender in the heavyweight division.
The story of Tom Aspinall was one of struggle, one of horrific setbacks, but ultimately one of greatness.
One day I'm going to be UFC heavyweight champion of the world, but I always seen it in my mind.
The new wave, the next generation. Bledson goes right under the chin.
But to understand why we are witnessing a generational talent, we must go back to the start.
My dad, he used to work in IT, but he retired from that years ago and then started teaching jiu-jitsu full-time. My dad is a former fighter himself. He's always been into martial arts and it's always been around, even on my mum's side. They had fighters, boxers, and even if they weren't fighting professionally, they were all like scrappers and stuff anyway, so.
Having a family of fighters around in one sense or another, and a father who was a UK pioneer of jiu-jitsu, would lead Tom down a path of combat at a young age.
It's always been in my life.
Tom started to grapple when he was maybe 6 or 7. He'd done all the particular sports, jiu-jitsu, boxing, wrestling, and then I'd met Colin from Carbon, and it just came from there, yeah.
Heading into his teenage years, Tom's father would take his son to a humble gym out of Liverpool, to a trainer who you may know as Darren Till's head coach. Tom's father would strike a deal with the legendary MMA coach.
I'll teach you a little bit of jiu-jitsu if you coach my son. I was lucky enough to get him so young, so I was able to mold him into what I thought I'd like him to look like.
After years of being molded by the best trainers the UK and perhaps the world had to offer, Tom's talents now needed to be put to the test.
Sit down with Tom probably when he was 15 and said, what is it you want to do? And he just said straight away, I want to be in the UFC.
And so with the goal of joining the UFC, all Tom had to do was fight and prove his worth on the regional scene.
Oh, big shot! And he's out! And it's all over! Putting in the work here. Big punches from Tom Aspinall. This is going to be it. The referee takes a close look and it's all over.
He's going to take his back. This is where, there we go. He gets to the mount position and that shot looks very tight to me, Dave. There's a tap.
Oh my word!
There's the tap. You were right there. Unbelievable. First victory.
Tom would begin his journey into MMA in 2010 as an amateur. Over the course of 4 years, he would go undefeated in 6 fights, finishing all but one of his opponents in the first round. Tom in these bouts looked incredible and deadly. Toward the end of 2014, he would transition into the professional sport and over the next 2 years, fight in 7 different bouts, winning 5 in the first round and unfortunately losing twice, once in the third round in a fight that the Brit was handily winning and seemed to be on the cusp of getting a finish. But his experienced opponent would chuck in a cheeky heel hook and snatch victory in the face of defeat. The loss provided a valuable learning point for Tom, and besides a controversial downward elbow disqualification loss, Tom had not fallen short since. He was truly making a name for himself in the regional scene, so much so that opponents quickly became hard to find. Acquiring wins is a sure way to catch the attention of the UFC, and heavyweights are few and far between in Britain, so a lot of them chose to simply avoid Tom altogether for fear of losing. The fact that no matchups were presenting themselves meant that Tom actually contemplated leaving the sport altogether because he was unable to make money in the sport. This frustration would actually see him have a boxing match during this period.
Now I've been doing MMA for a long time. I've been struggling to make it pay financially and just not getting many rewards from it because I'm struggling to get fights, so it's time to switch over and do the boxing.
Tom was a talented guy. His father knew it, everyone in the regional scene knew it, but circumstances outside of Tom's control were pushing him away.
A heavyweight MMA fighter in the UK is very tough. I had 3 little kids and not had a fight for like 2 years because opponents kept pulling out all the time. There's just not a lot of like active heavyweights, so it's difficult to get fights. People want to protect their records. Yeah, it was just a tough time.
He was a father and a husband, and what use is a talent if it means your family suffers in the pursuit of it? But after 3 years away from the sport of MMA, Tom would return. He would join Cage Warriors, the premier promotion in the UK, and would put on 2 incredible performances of the UFC.
This is a big announcement, yeah. I just want to say that this guy fought a few weeks ago on Cage Warriors, an unbelievable performance. he knows who he is because he's standing right next to me, and he's in the UFC now, Tom Aspinall. So
Yeah.
Do you feel ready, yeah?
I feel ready, yeah. It's one of them. The heavyweight division's so shallow that you beat a couple of guys and you're in. It's not like the other divisions, you know. It's one of them where I'm going to have to learn on the job a little bit. And
After all the doubt that had almost seen him leave the sport and waste his talents elsewhere, Tom's time had finally come. And I only knew that with the help of today's video sponsor, Holzkern. Holzkern has amazingly produced this watch that I'm wearing today, but along with this, they have a plethora of other beautiful and intricate pieces of jewelry. They are an Austrian-based company that specializes in watches and jewelry. All their stuff is made from FCS certified natural materials, such as wood and stones, even peacock feathers. Not only does it give their items a really unique and natural style, but they are not destroying our forests in the process of making us look good. I mean, just gaze into the deep blue of this lapis lazuli from the watch that I picked out from Holzkern. I've been wearing it almost every single day for the last couple of months and getting a lot of compliments along the way. People love just how striking and unique this watch is. Holzkern makes everything in extremely small quantities, which, as you can see, ensures really high quality. But if this isn't your style, then there are plenty more pieces to be found on the website. Something like their Space Dust watch, which uses beautiful and natural wood. Or why not try some of their jewelry, like this acoustic bracelet. Whatever your style is, Holzkern has something for you, for the ladies and for the gents. And to make the experience even more greater, all items come in these beautiful wooden boxes, which is just such a distinctive way of getting a new piece. And I think that the box just looks awesome on my dressing room table. Holzkern offers free shipping worldwide and delivers to the US and the majority of Europe within 2 to 5 business days. If you like what you see, then I encourage you to check them out using the link in the description and pinned comment. And to support the channel, use code ACADEMIC for a discount off your first order. Thanks so much again to Holzkern for sponsoring this video. And now it's time to get back to Tom Aspinall.
Been the plan since Tom was able to walk that he would get here to the UFC, Dan.
This guy is a devastating individual at this heavyweight division.
It doesn't matter if you're on the UFC or you're on an amateur show. It's the same thing, just fighting another guy who's trying to knock you out.
ready? Up on, gents.
There is Tom Aspinall making his UFC debut. Round number 1.
Is there any chance you get in there on Saturday and you're like, oh my God, that's Andre Arlovski on the other side of the cage? How would you classify your start in the UFC?
It's going all right, isn't it? It's going well so far.
Tom would smash his way through the UFC heavyweight division. In just over 1 year, he would find himself ranked at number 10 in the entire world and finish every single one of his opponents along the way inside the UFC, 3 in the first round and submitting Andre Arlovski in the second round. In his final fight of 2021, he would also serve as the co-main event, taking on Sergey Spivak. It just spoke volumes of just how quickly he had ascended the ranks of the heavyweights, and not only done it successfully, but entertainingly as well, earning himself Performance of the Night bonuses in all but one fight. The most interesting thing about his rise during this time was that he had done it all without the support of a crowd, taking fights in empty arenas and settling for the cold and clinical atmosphere of the Apex. But even without those thousands of eyes, the lights still shine the brightest inside the octagon, and they did naught to faze the calm and collected Brit. The discussion around Tom's performances centered on just how quick he was, just how athletic he was, and perhaps the best thing about him, how well-rounded he was. The way he switched up on Arlovski and just ran him almost through the octagon wall was just incredible. You could see the blank expression on Andre's face. He never saw the shot coming, caught off guard and submitted with ease. His striking, crisp and clean, knocking out all those brave men who stood in front of him. The future was looking extremely bright for the heavyweight. He was young, he was exciting, and he certainly heralded in a new generation for the big guys, more technical, more versatile, and subsequently even more dangerous than all those men who had come before. And that's what stood out in his performances so far. He looked leagues ahead of everyone else. Now with a record of 11-2, Tom would await his next exciting matchup. When Tom had begun his rise in the UFC at the start of 2020, the champion at the time was a man that many consider to be the most decorated and greatest heavyweight this sport has ever seen. Well, that is in the UFC, of course. There's going to be a lot of angry comments in the bottom talking about Fedor or some other heavyweight, but for the UFC, Stipe certainly is the most decorated. He had defended the title 4 times, 3 of them consecutively, and had won it back from Daniel Cormier in their incredible trilogy, which had stalled the division for a couple years. A month after Tom had choked Arlovski in February of 2021, Stipe was set to face down Francis Ngannou for a second time, a man the Croatian had spectacularly defeated in his first fight against all odds. This time though, Francis had learnt a lot in his time rising back up through the rankings and was looking more dangerous than ever. Stipe was also ticking on in age, time slowly eroding his level of performance inside of the octagon. The fight would be a rather expected affair. After Stipe attempted a takedown, of which had won him the first fight, Francis would shrug him off easily, and all those watching that fight at that moment knew it was over. And not even a minute opening into the second round, Stipe would be sent into abyssal darkness. Francis Ngannou walking away with the heavyweight championship of the world, the baddest man on the planet. He would defend the title a year later in January of 2022 against an old training partner in Cyril Gane, and the world would be introduced to the mythical fighter known as D1 Ngannou. Francis would ride out a decision and defend his UFC title for the first time, but there was something else going on with Francis's career at the time, something that was a cause of concern for the UFC and something that would affect all heavyweights going forward, including Tom Aspinall. Francis, a man who had endured an odyssey from the sandpits of Africa all the way to fulfilling his dreams reigning atop the baddest sport on the planet, had had enough of being put in restrictive contracts, being told what he can and can't do. A man who had escaped that very thing from his home country had in his mind just returned to it. This time, he was dressed up in a suit and shook his hand. Francis wanted to be able to pursue his own desires, but ultimately, the UFC is a business and can't just let their champions gallivant over to boxing just because they want to. Or can they? I don't know, I'm confused. And so, after fighting out the last fight on his contract, Francis, in order to be released from it, would have to stall out until the end of the year to become a free agent. And so, for the remainder of 2022, the UFC and Francis would go back and forth in a lengthy public dispute. At some points, it seemed that Francis would sign back with the UFC under certain conditions, Dana White being extremely confident in retaining as heavyweight champ.
I've been in contract drama for 20 years with people. It's just part of the business. I honestly don't know where we'll end up. I'm sure we'll figure it out one way or another.
But then at other times, it almost seemed certain that Francis would leave. Either way, this heavyweight drama is important to have context with the rest of the video going forward. So where did Tom fit into all of this? Well, a day before Francis defended his title against Cyril Gane, news would break of Tom Aspinall's first main event. He would be taking on Alexander Volkanovski on 2 weeks short notice. Alexander Volkov in just 2 months' time in London. In a stacked British card, Tom would serve as the poster child, and that really spoke to the star power that he had built up in his short UFC tenure. His performances truly spoke for themselves. He was a heavyweight, on the lookout for finishes, he was exciting, and he was charismatic. Little wonder as to why he was already headlining massive cards. It was Tom's time to shine, and standing in front of him was a veteran and a dangerous opponent.
The secret is stay in the gym, believe in yourself, and that's it. Nothing spectacular, do you know what I mean? Pretty basic, but...
Is he well on his way to getting a title shot in the near future if he gets past Volkov?
Well, you break into the top 5, you're in the discussion.
Treating it like any other fight, you know? I know it's a little bit different. Got my opponent's much better, the crowd, all the rest of the stuff, main event, but I'm not really fazed by it, do you know what I mean? I'm just treating it like any other fight, and I'm very excited for it.
What I like to do is I go the chips, the gravy goes on top of the chips. Yes. And the fish is just a side. If the gravy touches the fish, I'm not mad at it. Like, I'm all right with that.
This is going to be the first time you meet Dana White. You said you never met him before.
My dad actually reminded me when I was a small child, like 12 years old, 13 years old, I was at an event with Dana White and I chased him down and I told the Dana White that one day I'm going to be in the UFC. And I forgot about it completely until my dad told me. And I just told Dana about it. We had a nice little exchange there.
Fighting in front of a hometown crowd in the main event of a UFC, that's got to be kind of like a dream for you, I would think.
This is what I envisioned in my mind for a long time. You know, I've been going to these events every time that the UFC's in London. I was at the last one.
It's like asking a woman who's never had children, what's childbirth like? I don't know. You know, I just exploded onto the scene. In a couple of years, I was a nobody, and then I'm main event in London.
But I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know. That's why you test yourself. That's exactly why you test yourself. So this is why I'm here, because I want to tick them boxes off. Yeah, I think I'm ready for it. I don't know if I'm ready for it. We'll see on Saturday. He's had at this point, about 26 million fights. So his experience factor is way up there. He's done loads of 5-rounders. I've never gone past the second. He's got good striking, his takedown defense is brilliant, mega experienced.
Tonight, he has the potential to change his life forever.
Alexander Volkov served as Tom's greatest threat to date. The Russian was certainly a unique problem. His striking was incredible, and his height and range was a rather difficult puzzle to solve for just about any top heavyweight. But Tom went in there and not only proved that he could hang with him effectively on the feet, but also take it to the ground and end things quickly.
How impressed were you with Tom?
Yeah, I mean, this kid showed tonight that he's the real deal. I mean, he went in there against one of the absolute best heavyweights in the world. In my opinion, winning the stand-up. He was beating him on the ground. He looked good everywhere. Everywhere the fight went, he looked great. I mean, this kid will break into the top 5. Now he's in the conversation to fight literally the best heavyweights in the world.
Tom mixed martial arts so incredibly well that he looked like he was born to belong in the top echelon of the big guys. His triumph over Volkov was the cherry on top of perhaps one of the greatest cards that has ever blessed UK soil. If you have not watched this event from start to end, then do yourself a favor and get on UFC Fight Pass and check it out.
9 out of 12 fights are finishes. It doesn't get better than that.
Crazy, incredible night. The energy in this place, the buzz, the fights.
I know that perhaps I'm biased being British, but the energy, the finishes, the atmosphere, the performances, it was just the most insane and exciting fight night I think I've ever seen. Many pundits agreeing with this very notion. Dana White after the event was just as ecstatic as everyone else, even handing out 9 $50,000 performance of the night bonuses to all finishers.
You know what you do?
What do you do?
You give everybody with a finish a bonus.
So you got 9 bonuses tonight.
Yeah, was it 9? Yeah, I think it was 9. Yeah, 9 bonuses.
Absolutely incredible.
And I couldn't be happier to do it.
From Arnold Allen's TKO win over Dan Hooker, to Paddy's submission win, to Meatball Molly's spinning back elbow, and Paul Craig's triangle choke, the night was fucking amazing. After such an unbelievable event, the UFC scrambled to get back to the UK, Dana White promising that very same night that he would return the exact same year, and he was quick to deliver. Within 4 weeks, the return was announced, and it would be in just 3 months' time. With Francis still undergoing problems with his contract, and the title picture looking extremely murky, Tom wanted to cement his position in the division and to claim his spot to be next in line for a shot at gold and leather. Tom was so close to his goal of becoming a UFC champion. In April of 2022, it was announced that Tom Aspinall would be taking on Curtis Blaydes in the British heavyweight's second consecutive headliner at the O2 Arena in London. Curtis Blaydes was a viable threat to Tom's undefeated UFC tenure. The American had only lost once to Derek Lewis and twice to heavyweight champ Francis Ngannou. He was currently riding a 2-fight winning streak and was primed for his own shot at the title, ranked number 4 in the world respectfully. If the UFC could soothe things over with Francis, then the winner of this pivotal matchup would surely be the man vying for his belt next.
Curtis Blaydes has been around the top 5 longer than most. Can he slow down the Brit tonight? Oh, no! Wow! His knee's gone. Such a shame. What a tragedy that is. Such a shame he's gone. What a tragedy that is. To see this.
But it may be that you've got a tear that's just in and out of the joint, jamming it, and fit beautifully with your story. Where your career's been going is a worry, and obviously I need to talk to your agents about that. Now is not the time to panic. I bend it up, I rotate it. Oh, that's not great. It's not great.
I don't. Oh, that's. For whatever reason, that night, I kicked him and my knee just locked up completely. I kicked him, my knee locked, and I just couldn't move it. Something snapped in there, and then that was it. So,
are you anxious about
having the surgery.
No, not really. I might wake up a female. It might put me unconscious. I'll wake up. No genitals, female genitals.
You had the surgery, what was it, maybe 10, 14 days or so ago?
It was 2 weeks ago today, actually.
2 weeks ago today.
What did it end up being, like ACL, MCL?
Yeah, so I tore my MCL and I tore my cartilage as well. So
a stretched ACL. So my femur bone readjusted, like shaved up, so it fit better in my knee socket. Yeah, pretty big deal, pretty big stuff.
I wanted to ask you that, did you have was that bad going into that fight? Or have you always had like knee problems?
The way I don't like to talk about it too much because it's like people say like, well, why did you fight with a bad knee?
I used to what I would call like lock up, where it had like stay in one position, and I couldn't move it until someone like pulled it straight. That happened a few times before, definitely.
What was the mental aspect of it like though? Because obviously that must have been hard.
Not easy.
The first 4 weeks post surgery were some of the most miserable days of my entire life.
From the fight, when you're talking about the fight and stuff, it actually still, I've not really even watched MMA since, to be honest. I've not even really, just keeping a little bit of a low profile, to be honest, because I've been a little bit down in the dumps over it. I didn't want, that's, as fighters, that's not what we want to happen. In 15 seconds, that's not what we want.
So we all came back, I had the surgery and stuff, and I was planning on having all this work done on the house, like, when I was away, so I could come back to it, basically come back to a building site. I have my little kids running around wanting to do stuff, and I'm just sat there with a massive swollen leg, just being like, what has just happened? Bit of reflecting time in that, and I feel like it gave me a good look on stuff that I've been doing wrong.
I just don't want to be the guy with the bad knee anymore. I want to be the guy who's going to be the future heavyweight champion. I don't want to be this guy with the bad knee anymore.
It was pretty hard seeing how Tom had taken the injury, and it's even harder still putting yourself in his shoes. Unimaginable to have such a devastating loss play out in front of thousands of hometown fans. His heavyweight ascension not derailed due to competition, but rather misfortune. Tom had a slew of concurrent injuries in the area surrounding his knee, of which it was expected that he would not be able to return to competition for at least a year. A long road of rehab lay out before him, a path full of doubt, hardship and struggle. Tom had once said that the hardest thing he had ever gone through in his career was having a lack of competition, an inability to put food on the table for his growing family, a circumstance that almost saw him deny his talents and head into another industry for work. But it's safe to say that this setback, this knee injury, was now his toughest demon to date. But as we know, it is in the fires of tribulations that greater men are created. Tom would now have to sit on the sidelines and watch the heavyweight division pass him by. At the turn of the new year, 6 months after Tom's injury, news of the next era in the UFC heavyweight division would unceremoniously leak into the mainstream. Those waking up on the 14th of January would be met with a leaked video of the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, displaying an extremely strange matchup, Jon Jones versus Cyril Gane, for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, not interim, the undisputed belt. The initial leak was hit with a lot of doubt. How could this matchup even be possible? There had been no information of Francis parting ways with the UFC, but those who had been paying close attention knew what Francis had been saying this whole time must have been true. Francis had stalled out for an entire year and had automatically been released from his contract, making him a free agent, one of the most controversial things to happen in modern UFC, a reigning undisputed champion, leaving the organization in favor to pursue extracurricular activities that would make him one of the richest athletes in the world, that is. Ngannou's story is an incredible tale of defiance, struggle, and survival that is, in a ruthless sport, and an even more ruthless industry, and it's one that I look forward to telling in greater detail in the future. Regardless, we still hadn't heard from the president of the company, so a day later, Dana White would address all questions in the post-fight press conference of UFC Fight Night 217.
T-Mobile blew the fight. That wasn't supposed to go up, but it did. This is for the official heavyweight title. We've been working on a new agreement with Francis for like 2 years now. We had gotten to a point where, he was going to fight Jon Jones, and Jon Jones has been willing and ready and able to fight anybody. He didn't care who it was. Could have been anybody in the heavyweight division. He was ready to go. And Francis, we offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody. And he turned the deal down.
Cyril Gane, ranked at number 1 in the division, had won the opportunity to fight for UFC gold once more, and he would be facing down a man who had been promising to move to heavyweight for a long time, and a man who hadn't stepped in the octagon for over 3 years, and many consider him the consensus GOAT of MMA. At first, Jon Jones' return was met with a lot of people claiming that he'd only moved up to this terrifying division because Francis had finally left.
Not only is Jon Jones not afraid of Francis, Jon Jones is the baddest fighter to ever live. Ever.
Jones even said he wanted Francis in Africa.
Is he fucking awesome?
But the problem with that sentiment is that Dana had been promising Francis to fight with Jones as incentive for the man to stay in the organization, promising to make him the best paid heavyweight the sport had ever known, even better paid than Jones, that is. Jon was not scared. He had accepted the fight many times and had been waiting for Francis. The fight with Gane was scheduled for March, and it rolled around quickly. There was a lot of excitement surrounding the fight, and a lot of questions also. Was Jon big enough for the division? Was Gane striking too much? Would Jones dominate the Frenchman on the ground? It was actually a really exciting time for the sport. A shame really that it wasn't Francis in there, but settling for Gane was enough to satiate the appetite of bloodthirsty fans. Except, there was one problem with the matchup. No blood would be spilled. Within the first 3 seconds, Gane would kick Jones in the babymaker, giving pause to the action, but within a minute of the fight restarting, Jones would take the Frenchman down, and then less than a minute later, Jones would suffocate the baguette eater and claim his place as the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, further distancing himself in the discussion of who the greatest is. Jones had made the fight look easy. Too easy, in fact. Jones in this weight class was a real problem.
There were a couple of interviews leading up to this fight where he was saying, I'm gonna make this look easy. And I thought that was a silly thing to say. The guy is unfucking believable, man. He really is.
The heavyweight division was now looking to put forth another man as a potential opponent to Jones, and whilst the most likely option in Dana's eyes was Stipe, all others wanted to prove their worth. From Sergey Pavlovich and Curtis Blades, who had a would-be number 1's contender matchup, to up-and-comers like Gelton Almeida, but there was one man who had been sidelined, who was ready to return and make a statement. In May, a matchup between number 10 ranked Marcin Tybura and now number 5 ranked Tom Aspinall was announced. A fight to take place in the summer. Tybura, a Polish fighter that had won 7 out of his last 8, making him a credible threat to the Brit. It was Tommy's 3rd main event at the O2 in a row, his chance for redemption in front of the crowd, who had seen his worst moment play out before them. It was a fantastic matchup, and it was a full circle moment to have his comeback in the same stadium that had all gone wrong. Tom's mindset going into the bout was resolute. He was ready to prove a point, and he had one thing on his mind: the road to the heavyweight championship of the world. A strap more alluring now that it was wrapped around the waist of the greatest of all time. A dream matchup for any fighter, but standing in his path was a heavyweight threat and a hometown main event. One day before Tom was to make his walk to the octagon, Dana would make clear his plans for Jones. His next matchup would be against Stipe Miocic, a fight marketed as the GOAT of the sport versus the greatest heavyweight the sport has ever known. The problem was, Stipe was kind of old. Heavyweights do seem to have more longevity in the sport than other divisions, but the Stipe we got in his last few outings was worlds away from that man that had claimed the belt that half-decade previously, and now we were all about to be force-fed a matchup labelled as the Battle of Giants. But the reality is, fans saw the bout for what it was: Jones being fed a name to fuel his legacy, a man with arthritis being chucked to the biggest shark in the pond. I mean, Stipe is easily one of my favourite fighters, but it just seemed like a total mismatch considering the circumstances. Stipe has that dog in him, and perhaps it will be enough, but I doubt it. It was especially insulting to announce the fight one day before a pivotal matchup between Tom and Marcin, but it was all white noise in the background of Tom's incredible comeback. He had a single goal: impressing his home crowd and proving to everyone and himself that he belonged back in the sport.
A lot rests on this fight, and I'm going to go straight back to the same place, straight back to the scene of the crime, put on the performance of my lifetime.
Talk about the shape of you, fella. You've gone to town on this, haven't you?
Straight from OnlyFans.
I just had Marcin Tybura in here. He's, in his words, I used to be fat, now I'm not.
I think he's still a bit fat. He's incredibly durable. You know, he's one of the best heavyweights in the world. He's top 10 heavyweight, so you can't take anybody lightly.
People are dismissing Tybura, and you can't. As the fight goes on, the more dangerous he gets, and he'll keep coming. And I think he'll try and wear Tom out.
58. 258. 258 pounds for Tom Aspinall.
I think that what happened might have changed his life for the better. Now he's thinking, I can't leave anything to chance.
Imagine if we could end up with with an England versus, Jon Jones fight.
No, you're making me dream.
1 year ago, Tom Aspinall's world fell apart here in the O2 Arena, but the time away has been spent utterly focused on rebuilding himself to serve his dream of becoming a UFC champion. The return of Tom Aspinall against that man on a hot streak. Main event time from London's O2 Arena.
When you came out the gate, everybody was high on you. You got injured, now it's your time back.
Yep.
People are high to see you return. Does that add any extra pressure on you?
Not really. I got to do my thing. All that outside stuff, that's just noise to me. I'm just going to go in there and enjoy myself tomorrow and put on a big performance. That's the plan. All that other stuff's irrelevant. What people expect of me, what I expect of myself and all that kind of stuff. I don't think about that kind of
First
stuff.
kick that he threw.
And he must be all right. Yeah, I was going to say.
I think so.
Let's test it out. Oh!
Within the first 15 seconds, Tommy would land a thudding high kick with his injured leg, dispelling any notion that his injury had made him timid or that he might never be able to use it the same again. And then just a minute later, after a devastating elbow and a straight down the middle that found its mark, Tybura would fold to the mat, with the fight being stopped moments later. In just over a minute, Aspinall had made a statement, returning from a horrific injury and putting on display one of the most emphatic and athletic performances we have seen from the young fighter. Aspinall would say in his Octagon interview, "I'm not going to say I'm back, because I'm a different fighter now. My body is different and I'm going all the way." A statement made even more emotional by the monologue that Tom had walked out to. Before making his way to the Octagon, Tyson's Fury voice would echo throughout the stadium with a meaningful message. Tyson would say, "It's not about how many times you get knocked down or how many times you win or you lose. It's about how you can come back, keep coming back and keep moving forward." Like Rocky said, nothing is ever going to be easy. If you want something that is very hard to get, you have to sacrifice, dedicate, and keep pushing, no matter what, and never let people tell you you can't, because tonight again, I'm going to show you that it's very possible to achieve anything you ever want, as long as you believe it. And Tom would manifest this sentiment in the Octagon, destroying all doubt that any fans might have had about his performances going forward. Tom had cemented his place in the division, and his call-out after the fight was tactical and correct, calling forth the winner of the Garn-Spivak fight that was taking place toward the end of this year. Aspinall wanted to confirm his spot as number one, the next in line. It was a perfect event and a perfect fight for Tom. All the emotional pain, all that suffering, all that momentum that had been derailed in his ascension, all the trials and tribulations, it had all been washed away, and now his prospects for the future were looking extremely bright once again. I just want to say that if you're enjoying this content, then now would be a great opportunity to support the channel by liking, commenting, and if you haven't already, perhaps subscribing if you feel like I've earned it. Doing this massively helps the channel grow, and so I really appreciate it. Also, consider becoming a member to get all videos early and your name in the credits. You can do that by using one of the buttons next to the subscribe. Thanks guys. November was rolling around. Tom, since his victory, had yet to announce his next fight, probably stalling to see who the victor of the clash between Jones and Stipe would be, and whether or not either of them would retire. It was smart to wait out and see how the division would shape up, because anyone in the top 5 could be called up for an opportunity at any point.
Hang on, love. It's Hunter. Hey, well, what's on?
I'm waking you up, aren't I? You didn't go on vacation yet, did you?
No. I'm just starting at training with Dad. What do you want?
Alright, so here's what I got.
It's not Jon Jones, is it?
Jon Jones blew his shoulder. He's gonna be out 8 months.
What, so me and the Russian?
So this is between you and I. I'm gonna probably announce it shortly. You and Sergey Pavlovich are gonna be fighting for the interim title, Madison Square Garden.
Little problem though. Yeah. I'm in Poland. And I'm fat as fuck. Isn't he never about an MMA fighter?
In a shock to everyone, 2 weeks before Jones and Stipe were scheduled to face off with one another, Jones would tear his shoulder, leaving Stipe without a dance partner. The UFC, wanting to probably protect the highly marketable matchup between Jon and Stipe, and a little bit of Stipe probably refusing to take a new match on short notice, decided that their best move was to take both men off of the card entirely. So what they did is promote Yuri and Poatan to the main event, and then conjured up an interim heavyweight title fight between the Russian swang and bang berserker, number 3 ranked Sergey Pavlovich, and the British man himself, Tom Aspinall. 2 weeks notice for heavyweights is probably not the worst thing to happen in the world. Tom was enjoying his time off, but he was always a man to stay in shape. Pavlovich did have a massive advantage in the fact that he was already scheduled as the backup fighter for the event anyway, so the fight was easy enough for the UFC to put together in a panic. I don't like interim title fights, I'll be honest, but providing Tom the chance to put leather and gold around his waist was something I was definitely all in for. The question was, could Tom pull off the upset in the historic Madison Square Garden?
What would it mean to you if he were to go from the garage to a world champion?
It means more for me because it's meant for him. It's not about me.
I feel like I'm going to be heavyweight champion of the world. And I didn't know if that's going to be this weekend or in 5 years, or like at some point I'm going to be heavyweight champion of the world before this career is over. So,
what is the hardest part about being a fighter?
I don't really like getting punched that much, you know.
Right now, British mixed martial arts is in the best state it's ever been. We are truly represented on the world stage. We've got Leon Edwards, and when Tom does what I think he's going to do, we're going to have 2 champions, you know. So I think Tom Aspinall is going to go out there, fly the flag to the highest degree.
I mean, before I was like half in and half out. Since the injury, you know, I had a lot of time to think. I had a lot of time to realise what I need to put my focus on, what I need in my life, both inside and outside the gym. And yeah, it was a blessing in disguise. It was shit at the time. It was absolutely terrible, but dangerous. I'm not even going to like beat around the bush and bullshit it. Like, the guy is really, really dangerous if you play his game. So,
what does it mean to fight in Madison Square Garden?
Can we switch it to someone who doesn't ask shit questions, please?
It's not a 2-week training camp. It's the decades of work and sacrifice that have gone into this moment. How do you think that mindset is an advantage for you going into Saturday?
I never even really considered that. I was always a bit like, I'll be all right 2 weeks, but he's absolutely right. Like, I've been working my whole life for this. I've been involved with martial arts since I was 8 years old, something like that. I'm 30 years old now, so just think it's a lifetime of work. He's absolutely right. The last 6
Live from Madison Square Garden, this is UFC 295.
Sergey Pavlovich is that thing you see at night that makes you wake up with a shortage of breath, because the moment he gets his hands on you, he can put you out.
Tom Aspinall is the most well-rounded contender in the heavyweight division. He has fantastic striking, submission abilities, grappling abilities, and his explosiveness, his speed, and his finishing ability is second to none.
Aspinall's father, Andy, in his corner. He's been in essentially every training session since Tom was 8 years old.
Those leg kicks will pay dividends.
This man right here, my father, has worked harder than anybody, so this belt is dedicated to my father.
Sergey Pavlovich served as one of the scariest individuals to roam the heavyweight division in modern times, knocking out his last 6 opponents in scary and destructive fashion. A man who would just wildly swing amidst the chaos until his dance partner would succumb to the blissfulness of the dark depths of the sunless realms. And it is that wildness where Tom would find his opening 1 minute and 9 seconds into the first round, meeting his mark and ending the chilling rise of Sergey. And it is with great honesty that Aspinall would declare in the post-fight interview that he had never been so scared in his life, yet he believed in himself, and that's all it took to overcome that trepidation, unwavering confidence in his innermost self, his team, and ultimately his father, who had raised and moulded him into a champion of the world, the man who had put him on the mats when he was 6, the man who had taken him to an MMA gym at the age of 14, and the man that had convinced him to stay in the sport when he had become so desperate before the UFC debut. And it is that man that would have the most prestigious strap in all of sports put upon his shoulder.
This man right here, my father, has worked harder than anybody, so this belt is dedicated to my father.
Tom would join two men who had risen before him as bastions of British MMA, Michael Bisping and Leon Edwards respectively, a small island in Europe that had produced some of the greatest fighter to grace the sport of mixed martial arts. Aspinall's victory made even more sweeter that it had been spectacularly conducted on just 2 weeks' notice, 2 weeks where it would transpire that he would be unable to train effectively due to a damaged back. There is something to be said for the spectacular and underdog nature of British practitioners winning that coveted 5.5 pounds of gold and leather, from Michael Bisping's short-notice left hook that sent the arrogant and dismissive Luke Rockhold into unconsciousness, to perhaps one of the most unbelievable and hair-raising moments this sport has ever seen, when Leon Edwards, after 5 rounds of being dominated, would pull himself out of the fire to land one of the most shocking head kicks of all time, ending Usman's reign of dominance on top of the welterweights. And now we have to add to that list Tommy's short notice and injured performance, taking on a dominant and calamitous heavyweight in Sergey Pavlovich, a journey made even more impressive when you consider the road that lays out before him now, a path that leads him to the greatest of all time, Jon Jones, and perhaps if anyone can do it, it might just be that man from a humble town out of the UK, because if history serves us correct, then it's the heart and courage of a British man that can overcome the greatest odds inside the octagon. With Jon Jones still out injured and Dana White dangling the carrot in front of Stipe with the promise of a shot at undisputed gold, Tom wanted to be active, and it looked like his only option was to defend the interim title, something that very rarely happens in this sport. In fact, Renan Barão is the only interim champion to defend his title outside of the heavyweight division. The heavyweight division, on the other hand, is an utter steaming pile of shit when it comes to lineage, interim titles, interim title defenses, and champions leaving the organisation. It's such a confusing tale that my good friend Napoleon Bonaparte has made hours and hours worth of videos on the lineage of the heavyweight championship. It's an incredible series that's a true work of passion and love, so please check it out and don't be distracted by Napoleon's insatiable lust for Valentina Shevchenko. So the question was, where did Tom's interim title defence fit in? Well, in May of 2024, Aspinall was confirmed to be the co-main event of UFC 304, his title put on the line in Manchester against an old rival, Curtis Blaydes. It was a full circle moment, and it was time for Tom to prove what he had been saying for years at this point. If not for that injury, he would have defeated Blaydes. After a dull card of lackluster performances, Tom Aspinall would walk into the Manchester arena to thousands of fans starving for bloodshed, demanding violence inside of the cage, and the Brit did not disappoint. After a flurry of punches in the opening few seconds, the men would find themselves clinching alongside the cage. After separating from their tussle, Curtis would land a heavy shot on Tom, but he was unfazed and returned in kind, putting Blaydes face down, ass up, and would end the fight after a barrage of punches on the ground, Tom once again having the People's Championship belt wrapped around his waist. And now Tom, after everything, still remains the biggest third wheel in the sport today, sitting on the sidelines with his plastic Power Ranger belt, whilst fans eagerly await a 41-year-old taking on Jon Jones, both of which are more than likely to retire after that fight anyway. And in any other reality, if this was any other fighter, Stipe would have been booted from the rankings years ago, and Jon Jones would have been stripped of his title. But here we are. More than likely Jones will be taking on Stipe this November in Madison Square Garden, and we have to pray to the MMA gods that Bones will stay in the sport, not riding off into the sunset, and instead face down the interim champion and unify the belt, giving the division a passing of the torch. Because heavens know, that's the real matchup that we all want to see. Tom has become a star of this sport, and he does deserve that massive fight. And that star power wasn't just earned by talking trash or driving exotic cars. Tom earned his name by being a fighter's fighter, by taking everyone out in his path, working his way up the rankings in a proper fashion, and he is now a man that carries a belt that brings with it the moniker of the baddest man on the planet. But that moniker is pulled into question by the presence of one man. Chael Sonnen spoke of that matchup against Jon Jones, and he said that more than likely Jones will win because we've never seen grit from Tom, but we most certainly have seen it from Jones.
History says the younger guy wins. If the younger guy is also bigger, history says he wins easily. Could he beat him? Yeah. Would he beat him? Do you truly believe with a W? Would? Do you truly believe that? No, you don't. No, you don't. And when it comes to grit, and you gotta have it, We know for sure that Jon does. Now, that doesn't mean that Tom does not. But we don't know that.
And sure, from a surface level analysis, we can be blissfully uninformed as to the exact nature of Tom's grit. But when we are calling into question his heart inside the octagon, it's built from the premise that we just simply haven't had the opportunity to see it unfold. And so to proclaim a lack of grit is simply ignorance. That man who was pushed out of the O2 arena upon a stretcher after having his career ascension razed to ash and dust in front of 20,000 adorning hometown fans, only to return a year later from one of the most brutal injuries any athlete can succumb to, spoke of more heart than can ever be displayed in the octagon. True courage is found in the battles we least expect. A fool would cross the threshold of the chain-linked fence and expect anything other than a contest of wills amidst a flurry of ruinous punches. But no one expects our greatest tribulations to present themselves in such a divisive and vulnerable moment, and the mere fact that he came back to not only manifest victory in the stadium 365 days later, but to go on and win the heavyweight championship and then defend it against the very man who had brought that trial upon him in the first instance, tells me that that is a man who has grit layered into the fabric of his spirit. I cannot speak as to whether Tom can beat the greatest athlete this sport has ever known, but what I can do is have faith in a man who has resolute belief in himself, and perhaps most importantly, I can have unwavering confidence in the power of a father and a son, a relationship that has brought into this sport one of the greatest stories ever, and potentially one of the greatest heavyweights of our generation.
Come on, Tommy. We're not going to let it die. We're going to sing that song until the big return, until you hoist that title. How are you doing, my friend?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing. I don't know. I don't feel like I deserve the song right now, to be honest.